Why do many nonprofit organizations have short lives, only 6 to 15 years? The experience of a renowned hospice in San Francisco offers some answers. There are more than 1.5 million nonprofit organizations in the United States, and more are being born every day. But for all the writing about how nonprofits can be founded and scaled, almost no one publicly interrogates the other end of the life cycle: what happens when a nonprofit dies? The Nonprofit Quarterly reports that, although data on nonprofit closings are notoriously difficult to confirm through the Internal Revenue Service, the most likely age of organizational death is between 6 and 15 years. Tens of thousands of nonprofits close their doors every year, but we rarely harvest the lessons of their failures. In August 2015 I wrote a Fixes article about a model of how humans might die less expensively and better. According to the National Institutes of Health, the 5% most seriously ill Americans cost 50% of health care spending, with most costs incurred in the last year of life in hospitals. Enter Zen Hospice Project, a small nonprofit experiment in helping people in San Francisco die with less medical intervention, surrounded by beauty and care. The essay ended, "For those who do die at Zen Hospice Project, the whole point, of course, the send-off prioritizes the senses as much as the months that led up to it. The body is brought outside to the maple tree on the back porch and sprinkled with rose petals before a crowd of those who care, from the doctor to the plumber. People say a few words if they feel moved. Or they just sit in silence for a few minutes, a sacred pause before life marches on." Well, as of late last year, the program's guest house, which welcomed the dying, is itself dead. After 3 decades, the last rose petals were sprinkled on the last body and the old Victorian home in the Hayes Valley neighborhood was shuttered, repainted and sold for $3.25 million. Although the mindful caregiving training that took place at the house will continue at other locations throughout San Francisco, under the Zen Hospice Project name and the supervision of a longtime director, Roy Remmer, this dedicated home will be grieved, since its character and atmosphere exuded the soul of the nationally famous project. It seems appropriate to take a journalist's version of a sacred pause before life marches on and ask why. One way to answer why the home was abandoned is simple: money. The board and leadership team hadn't done a sufficient job of ensuring that there was enough funding to keep the place going. But after interviewing a wide range of people connected to Zen Hospice Project over the years, I'm convinced there's more to the story than that. And I believe there is a lot for the whole nonprofit sector to learn from the death. Lost in the story, in my heart of hearts, I believe people got lost in the story of the house, said Ladybird Morgan, who served 3 different times as interim director of nursing. The story of the house was everywhere, in a TED Talk in 2014 by Dr. B.J. Miller, then the executive director, nearly 9 million views to date, on the cover of California Sunday magazine and in an Oscar-nominated short documentary, Endgame. According to the organization's IRS Form 990, contributions increased only about 7.5% from 2014 to 2015. The focus was lost on what we actually do and what we do well, Jolene Scarella, director of nursing from 2015 to 2017, explained. We had such big language for such a tiny place. Many nonprofits pine for a TED Talk or a profile in a major newspaper. It logically promises funding, and fundraising is often the most time-consuming and soul-crushing part of a nonprofit leader's role. But not all media attention translates into donations. And even those organizations that do benefit monetarily must weigh the time and energy it takes. Many people spend a month preparing for a TED Talk, a lot of staff time. I could feel the way in which I was distracting from the mission of the place, even as I was spreading our message more broadly than ever before, Dr. Miller said. It's part of why I left. He resigned in 2017. Most of the staff members I spoke with who worked at the guest house, preparing medication, washing bodies, having hard conversations, felt unsupported near the end. What was created to be a place focusing on paying attention to the person right in front of you became absorbed in paying attention to the person right in front of you. It's not as if the two functions are incompatible. Many efforts to bring social change involve both constructing a new way of doing something and evangelizing on that new way. But an organization needs a staff that can do both well. Little fires everywhere. It wasn't just media hype that made things challenging. The internal culture at Zen Hospice Project became notoriously toxic in recent years. Many people felt it got demonstrably worse when Dr. Miller left and George Keller, a business executive, took over. Mr. Keller declined to be interviewed for this article. Diane Maley, who worked at Zen Hospice Project in various roles from 2011 to 2016, said, "Our funding was actually on a good trajectory, but as they say, culture eats strategy for breakfast." While many staff members and volunteers blame Mr. Keller, others also point to tension that had been long developing between the volunteers and the staff. Zen Hospice Project was known for its volunteer training program, which taught highly vetted people to slow down and cultivate awareness. Part of why the founders were so committed to this training was that they knew, from personal experience, how easy it is to get lost in your own projections when you're at someone's bedside. Frank Ostaseski, a founder, who has accompanied over 2,000 dying people, explained, "It is not normal to be with dying people every day. That means that our normal coping systems just aren't sufficient. We knew it was important for the organization to address that. And yet, as the years went on, the rigorous commitment to mindfulness became stronger among the volunteers, but weaker among the staff members, many of whom were hired without experience with palliative care or mindfulness training." Some of those who experienced the volunteer culture at the house thought that, for all its merits, it also had a tendency toward righteousness. "Anything can be appropriated by the ego, including mindfulness," Mr. Ostaseski said. "Mindfulness practice is not about self-improvement or creating a club. It is really about being able to meet what's in front of you." A chasm that proved debilitating formed between the staff members, volunteers and leaders, Ms. Morgan said. "When you're surrounded by the discomfort of death and dying," she said, "it is tempting to try and escape into your role of nurse or volunteer and somehow separate yourself. Instead of tracking your own emotions and acknowledging where you are struggling, you focus on external details, most commonly, what someone else is or is not doing.